I'm back with Marty Strong. Marty, for people that don't know you, you had a distinguished career in the SEALs. Then you came out and you had a great career in the private sector with UBS. And then you're just getting ready to release your 12th book. So you are incredible to succeed in one industry, let alone doing three very different careers. So I always have so much respect for people like you. So it's a pleasure to see you again.
Well, thank you for that warm up.
Marty, we were talking a little bit before we started recording. I'd love to start with your thoughts on, there was that, not the, I know there's a trial and everything, but there was the person that recently passed away in the training for Hell Week. And a lot of people are saying, it's just too difficult. They're pushing people too far. But I think from a societal level, it seems like life has got, too easy for many people. And I think as a new father with a 3-year-old son, I want to really toughen him up for life. I think a lot of the problem with the youth today is they've just had a very easy upbringing. And then when crises come in, which is inevitable in life, they're not really equipped to deal with it. And I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing so much depression and a lot of negative things in society. So I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about your experience with just pushing the need to push people to their absolute limits.
So you touched on a couple of things that really kind of goes to the root cause of, say, special operations selection. It doesn't matter what the service is, Green Berets, Marine Special Ops, or SEALs. And this is the case overseas, too, from everything I've been able to gather on counterparts and special ops. Psychological resilience. So psychological resilience is something that you're not taught when you go into one of those programs. It's something that you have to find in yourself and then exhibit in the face of all kinds of adversity. Adversity that's been choreographed on purpose to cause you to come to grips with your own fears, your own lack of confidence, and kind of come to a point where you make a decision that you want to or you don't want to continue with the adversity. So what you end up with is kind of the false mythology that you have to be some big badass super athlete to get through those programs. And so because of that, everybody trains to be a big badass super athlete, and they get into the programs. And then say like in the SEAL program, 75% quit. And that's been going on since 1962, pretty much 75% attrition every single year, every decade, regardless of technology, regardless of a lot of efforts to try to get more people through. And maybe it's, if you think about it, it's because in society, in any slice of society, there might be only 20% of the people that even want to take the risk or face a challenge of something like that on purpose. Not an accident that they have to deal with, but something on purpose that they have to put one foot in front of the other and basically, put their heads right in the bear trap and then try to figure out if they're going to survive or not. Then out of that 20%, 75% don't make it. So you're really talking about a very small percentage of the general population going back at least to 1962 in the frame of reference of the SEAL community that have the, they used to call it intestinal fortitude. It's courage, but it's not courage of a physical sense. It's courage of a psychological and mental and intellectual. I mean, you sometimes you can be a high-end intellectual and see things to death. There's so much risk you can't mitigate that you decide, I just want to get out of this scenario. Or you can also apply intelligence to say there's so much risk, there is no mitigation, but I've committed to doing this. And so I'm just going to trust in the outcome and trust in my own sense of discipline, dedication to the outcome and the goal. And I'm going to put one foot in front of the other until they kick me out. And those are the kinds of people that end up not getting kicked out, and they don't quit. So they end up with the prize. So if you look at least every generation, this goes back to before World War I, there's always been a criticism prior to a war that society was getting soft, and society, quote unquote. The French got soft after World War II because they had a very anti-war theme because they got crushed hard, in World War I. And then they also lost so many people in World War II. So after every war, the French people decided we're going to try to downsize and downscope aggressiveness in schools, and we're going to try to be a peaceful nation. And so they purposely tried to restructure societal norms with the hope that meant that the outcome for France would be they wouldn't be in any more wars. Now, they didn't get the vote a couple of times. And America has been pulled into wars the same way. And so we've been a very pacifist nation that suddenly found itself, say, after Pearl Harbor in the middle of a war. And same thing with World War I. It was the sinking of the Lusitania. World War II is Pearl Harbor. We always get dragged kicking and screaming into these things. And the first thing we find out is usually we've cut the military back, so they don't have all the fancy tools and toys that the adversary has. And the second thing we find out is society's gone soft, and war is not a soft thing. War requires a diligent effort to improve yourself, not just with the skills, but also become hardened to things like environmental stress, being cold for a long time, not eating as much or not sleeping as much. These are things that are all part of war, going back to the beginning of warfare. And it's not a part of normal society. As a matter of fact, you said, so you've got a young child. Can you imagine if parents, looked at their little kids and said, what we're going to do today is we're going to go out in the snow until you guys have hypothermia, and then you're going to deal with it because I want you to be tough by the time you're 8 years old.
Right.
So in past ages, I guess, especially, in our frame of reference in our country, if you were a farm kid and you had to get up at 4:00 every morning and go out regardless of what the weather was, and you had to bring in animals, or you had to milk animals, or pick up eggs and all that. And then after working for an hour and a half like that, you'd eat breakfast and then walk 2 or 3 miles in that same environment to school. Then you'd walk back to the end of school and you had another hour and a half worth of chores, moving bales of hay or whatever. That wasn't a special program of training. That was
right.
Life.
Yes.
So the more we've moved to the urban society and people living in suburbs, the more our culture has decided that a parent's job is to try to protect and shield our kids from difficulty and adversity and things like that. Try to figure a soft landing, and or just completely eliminate the concern of the threat from their experience. What you end up with in every era is a larger part of the population that's not ready for something that's really tough, whether it's tough economic times, tough personal times, basic environmental things like just weather, like a hurricane or the effects of a tornado, or, like the Katrina hurricane, which caused the whole aftermath of Katrina in the United States. If people are prepared for that and they've never had to live through that, it's a much, much, much greater shock than, say, generations before. So that's all kind of wrapped up in, you end up getting in the military some reflection of the society at the time. And if a war starts and nobody's prepared for it, there's a period in the early days of the war where you end up losing a lot of people because they're not up to task. But what happens is eventually they all have to adapt because they don't have any choice if they're in uniform. Life, it's different. There's nothing forcing you to adapt to most things. You get to decide whether you're going to be a person who sees it, understands it, and adapts to it and becomes hardier and more resilient, or you're a person that's going to try to dodge it, escape it, stay away from it, and stay, protected, quote unquote.
So, Marty, just talking, you reminded me of that saying. It says, better to be a soldier in a garden than a gardener in war. Like, better to be prepared when you don't need it than be unprepared when you need it. And it's really interesting you said about how they've been saying this for many, many years about how society's getting too soft. Do you think in your experience that, doesn't it seem like it's the extreme of ease in life, where you don't have to leave your apartment for days, where you can order food and you can work remotely and you can stream entertainment, and you just, you don't have to move for days at a time. That wasn't around even just, a couple of decades ago. So it's a big worry for me that it seems like it's the softness of society is accentuating. But you make a great point that back in the day when there were so many more people on farms and doing hard labor, that it was just built in your life. So I know obviously that's changed as most of us have settled in urban communities, but it does seem like it's accentuated a bit the last few years, at least.
Right. So the natural strength that you develop by kind of banging up against the adversities of life, the hardships of toil that make you stronger, both mentally and physically. If you eliminate them, then all those behaviors and characteristics and attributes that you normally associate with strong people atrophy. It's not that the capability is gone away. It's just atrophy. And anybody that's had an easy life and then suddenly doesn't have an easy life, there's a period where they're, in denial. And then there's a period where they just hopes it goes away. But then they eventually have to just take a deep breath and go out and get a job mowing lawns or doing whatever they have to do to try to pay some bills. And then that process will then make them a tougher, hardier person, and therefore a less destructible, not indestructible, but less destructible person, which means that the threats that they run into going forward are less of a threat and the consequences are less, because they can just kind of take it in stride or they can figure out a way to beat it. And it's really hard to do it as a social plan. Nazi Germany tried to do it, taking all the youth of Germany and kind of convert them into like a super militarized version of the Boy Scouts and big physical fitness programs and hardiness and mountain climbing for, 7 and 8-year-old boys. And because they knew what they wanted to use them for in 10 years. But, that's a dictatorship, and the United States doesn't work that way. So we tend to have a kind of a sloppiness. We get relaxed. We get short-sighted. We get self-focused. All those things atrophy, and suddenly there's something like a war or something that hits us right between the eyes, and then we have to just kind of step up and deal with it.
So, are you worried for the future generations, or do you think it'll all kind of balance itself out?
I'm worried that I think a healthier balance is a war. I don't think that should be. We should be hoping for a war so Americans can kind of get their perspective back in line. I've done a lot. I mean, I've been to over 44 countries, and I've been to places that people are, taking drinking water out of, overturned hubcaps and things, and scraping up food and working 17, 18 hours a day, just trying to find enough food every single day, 7 days a week. And that's a very large part of the planet, or in situations like that, by head count. So when I'm, here in this country and I say, all right, so you're complaining because you're streaming Netflix thing, you're getting the what's it called, when you get the little spool, what's that called when you can't, there's a name for it.
I know what you.
Yeah,
so it's uploading. It's too slow.
Yeah. So you're getting a spool, and you're not getting to see your Netflix streaming thing the second that you wanted to see it, the way you wanted to see it, and then you get all disgusted and you just turn the whole thing off because you couldn't wait a couple minutes. Yeah, if that's your worst problem that day, or if you get to a restaurant and everybody's sitting in seats and there's no room, and that's your worst problem for the week, in perspective, your problems are not really human problems. They're contrived problems because your convenience and your desires, not your needs, but your desires have been interrupted or blocked, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is fighting for your life every day, you're probably a level 1.5 with those kinds of problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. There's one of my favorite books is by Angela Duckworth, and it's called Grit. And she talks about, of all the different traits in successful people, grit is one of the most important and often overlooked. And when you were seeing all the people trying out for the SEALs and going through selection, how much do you think grit is just something that we have in our DNA before versus something that we can kind of develop and grow throughout the process?
And then spooling things, buffering, it just came to me.
Buffering.
Yeah. There's that age-old argument, the nature-nurture argument. It goes to leadership, it goes to creativity. I think you can be courageous, and I think you can be indomitable coming right out of the womb. I think you can be that way because you had adversity maybe in your family life, which was kind of what happened to me. And a lot of other guys, by the way, that were in the special operations community, which then created adversity, which then created a requirement to deal with adversity. So you got psychological resilience. So you showed up on day one of your selection course pretty much ready for the mental aspect of the challenge. But if you didn't have any of that, I do think you can develop it in the moment. I do think it's a human capability. I think that it's an intellectual discussion you have to have as you're encountering the adversity. And you have to decide, okay, is the goal worth this? I didn't know this was going to happen. I didn't know I was going to have these thoughts about quitting or leaving or, shutting down my business or walking away from a marriage, whatever the issue is. But intellectually, I don't want these things to happen, or I want a prize at the end of a process. And so I see now what I have to do. I see now who I have to become. And I believe that you can have that internal narrative, internal dialogue, and you can decide, and you can become psychologically resilient in the moment and going forward. Just as much as you can have that same conversation to decide, I'm not going to do all those things and I'm not going to go forward.
That's so true. So many times we can look back at our life, and these key decisions really can change our life. And like you said, that decision, I'm sure, when you're just so miserable in Hell Week and the bell's right there to ring, and you know you're gonna have warm clothes and food if you do it. But by not doing it, I'm sure you can take some of the lessons of that strength for the rest of your life. And is there do you know about people that quit in Hell Week and then it's a huge regret for the rest of their life? Does that happen? I'm sure.
Yes, I know several people. I know friends whose children have gone through and then dropped out in Hell Week, and then you listen to the aftermath. Both through the parents' eyes, and then you hear some of it from the actual young men that decided not to go forward. The thing about the BUDS system, the Green Berets Q course, SBS, SAS have their own qualification selection course. And they don't expect everybody to make it. They're not looking for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of graduates. They're looking for people that are unique, and probably unique in about 5 or 6 or 7 different categories. So, if you're tough but not creative, if you're a great athlete but you're not psychologically resilient, see, these things offset. One strength is offset by a weakness. And that's usually why the 75% drop out. So I think that you regret those choices. I know lots of guys that quit, went out into the fleet for 2 years and came back and made it the second time. I know one guy that did it 3 times and made it the third time. So those guys faced failure, and rather than just kind of stew in it, they came up with that thought process I was telling you before. The dialogue got them to a point where if I do this again, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to make it. And in the case of the one gentleman, that was a course of 6 years that he went through 3. He went through my class, which was his second time in, and then he eventually graduated later on. But he quit my class because he got a pinched nerve in his neck. So, human beings are weird. I mean, they're really hard to understand, and they all have so many different inputs to the decisions they make and then the behaviors we see. So I think that some take it in stride and say, well, I did my best. And I think some regret it a little bit. I think some think about it to the last day of their life.
When you say about people that, maybe they failed once or twice and then they came back and they passed, it's probably, that physically they were probably capable the whole time, but it took them a few years to really develop that mental side. And I look at me, Marty, I feel like everything good in my life can be traced back to starting martial arts a week before my 13th birthday. And I'm turning 44 and I still train regularly. And it's been the biggest blessing. But one thing I realized was I was so focused on physical development that it wasn't until probably my mid 30s that my mind caught up, my mental strength caught up with the physical strength. And it's kind of what you're saying, where you have to have it all to make these selections. You can't just have one and not the other. And it's a great reminder just to be well balanced and not let, so many people are so focused on one area of their life at the expense of the others. And I think it's just such a good reminder that we really have to nourish all of them.
It's a multidimensional set of objectives. Martial arts. So I used to be the martial arts instructor for 8 years at one of the SEAL teams, and I did 3.5 years of Muay Thai from 54 to 57 and a half, just to kind of get back into it. So think about this, using your example, if all you did was physically train to a martial skill to attain the skill, but you never actually competed with anybody, you've got one facet down, but you don't know how you react in a moment where either your ego is on the line or maybe some level of pain, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you've dodged that on purpose. You've been offered competition. You don't want to do it because you're worried about your ego. What if I get beat in public? What if I look stupid, whatever? So that's something you have to then take on. And that then develops you psychologically. And now you've got 2 facets covered, right? But then you go into a bar and some guys start giving you a hard time. And you're accomplished on the skill side. In a athletic type set piece competition, you can hold your own. But now you got this other environment. And if you were like me, when I got to the point where I had the first two boxes checked and I found myself in a bar like that, I had an incredible sense of calm. I mean, I actually felt like if anything was going to happen, I was going to be able to handle it. And so the whole experience was more like me having a conversation, trying to talk somebody down from being stupid instead of me preparing for a fight. You know what I mean? And that's when I realized I got a third facet. I got this patience and poise and confidence and wisdom about my own abilities in the context of that particular scenario. So, you can take martial arts, you can take a lot of things, and you can start slicing up all the different elements, and maybe you get some of them based on how you approach it and you completely miss the others. Or maybe you have a good mentor or a sensei or somebody, a coach, who knows that there's more than just the one aspect, the technical aspect. And, and some things in creativity, sometimes it's you get the technical stuff down, now you got to take some risks. And that's like the competition thing. You've got to paint something, write something, do a software program, create a game, and throw it out there and take the hits, take the abuse, take the criticism. That's the competition. That's going to grind your idea out completely to dust, or it's going to grind the edges off your idea. And you realize you can actually do something like this, and now you know how to do it better.
Yeah, that's so true. Marty, one thing that I love is you have the 2 series of your fiction books, and a lot of the proceeds are donated to the SEAL Veteran Foundation that fights PTSD and also TBI, the traumatic brain injury. You're such a good example of someone that it looks on paper like it was very easy for you to transition from military life to corporate life to now like life for an entrepreneur as an author. But was it at the time, did you have some very dark moments, or was it fairly easy for you? Because obviously with so many people coming out of the military, and I see people coming out of being professional fighters, it's really hard to reintegrate. And I always thought when I was fighting, I've got so many other interests, it'll be so easy for me to transition. And there was a period where I was very depressed, and I felt like so much of my identity was tied up in something that was gone. That was a bit of a struggle, bit of a transition. So I can only imagine for people that don't have much else, their whole life was the military and combat, and then coming back to just, like you said, the day-to-day life where things are so easy and people are so clueless because life is so easy. They're complaining about, their Starbucks coffee not being hot enough, or, like you said, they're waiting for a table at a restaurant. It's these things that are just so insignificant in the big picture. It's got to be really tough, and my heart really goes out to them.
Yeah, so kind of 2 answers there. The first one is, was it easy for me? I inject a lot of this life story into all 3 books, mostly the first 2 books, because I want people to understand. I think Being Nimble has an introduction that's just kind of my early upbringing. I want people to understand that I was the least likely person to become a SEAL. I was 125 pounds, 18 years old when I started the program. We had 13 out of 126 that graduated, 13 originals out of the 126. So I was stunned as much as anybody else around me, because at 18 years old, I looked like I was 11. And it took me until another 10 years until I got up to 140, 145 pounds. And everybody else seemed to be so much better than me at everything. So what I decided to do is I decided to become an apprentice, and rather than whine about the fact that I didn't have, the credibility because I didn't have the years, in uniform yet, I said, okay, I'll just learn everything about this job. I'll learn everybody's job. I'll learn all the different categories of our different areas of expertise as a SEAL. And that put me on a track of productive and constructive kind of resume building, if you want to put it that way, and character building. Because as you went to each thing, if I became an accredited intelligence specialist, but I didn't know how to, overhaul an outboard motor, or I didn't know how to, I wasn't a jump master, I didn't know how to do something else. That meant every time I pivoted to the next lane, I was an apprentice again. And that's where a lot of times when I talk about intellectual humility. You basically have to establish intellectual humility, see yourself as an apprentice, either in the new area that you want to address, or a completely new profession. It's the same rule. And if you do it that way, what happens is you've honestly said, I don't know anything, but I'm going to roll my sleeves up and learn. And then you have to accept that it may, depending on what you're doing, if you're a door gunner in a helicopter in the Air Force, and you get out and you want to be an engineer, you've got to go through all that school, right? So you have to accept that. It's going to take so much time, so much money, so much effort, but then you're going to get an engineering degree. It's not going to be, hey, you were a door gunner. You were the best door gunner in the Air Force, so we're going to cut all that time in half. Life doesn't work that way. So once you accept that, and when I talk to veterans, I have a talk that I call "Thank you for your service," but basically it's kind of a backhanded slap. It's, don't rest on your laurels. Don't stare at your shadow box with your medals and everything in them. It'd be like looking at your high school track medals or something and just staring at them at the age of 50. You did it. You accomplished it. Bravo. Thanks for your service, whatever. But if you're asking me, how do I then do the next best thing or the next big thing? That's how you do it. You kind of shed that part of your personality. It's your ego that's attached to the level that you achieved. And you say, what's the new thing I want to do? And I roll up my sleeves. So I'll ask people, fighter pilots, these guys, you want to do this thing. How long did it take for you to be a successful fighter pilot? A peer level fighter pilot. And they said 6 years, 7 years before I was like kick ass. Well, how long? Why would you think that anything else you want to be kick ass at would take you less than 6, 7 years? And I can say that to a SEAL. I can say that to anybody. If you're an engineer and you want to become a door gun, same thing, guy. You're an engineer. You don't know anything about shooting a weapon out of a moving aircraft. So if you want to learn how to do that, and it takes 2.5 years and schooling and everything, you're going to have to pay that price. So that's the apprentice side. And I've had to do that each and every time I've started a new profession, whether it's learning how to write, learning how to, the whole publishing game and how to get publishers and all that. And then the flip side is that it never goes away. Just because you've accomplished something in, like in my case, they say 3 categories, that doesn't mean that there's some kind of special power that now if you pick a 4th category, you're going to just pick it up real fast and kick ass. And doesn't work that way. You have to apprentice yourself and go through the grind and pay the dues each and every time you decide to shift a track in life. And you know what? I'm proud of everything I did in other areas. I can't do anything about it now. I can't add to it. So I check the box, and I like when people say, "Hey, that was great that you did this," but usually when they're talking to me, I'm somewhere between apprentice and journeyman in some new thing. So I don't feel when I wake up in the morning like I'm kicking ass in my new area, and that keeps me humble, and that keeps me moving forward. A little bit of paranoia and humility helps with that kind of motivation.
Marty, I absolutely love that. There's so much wisdom. I think you wrote somewhere that excellence must be a lifelong habit. And that's that same mindset. I remember when I was boxing, when I was training at the trading floor in Chicago, and I was in my mid-20s, and I was fighting in the Golden Gloves in Chicago, and all the guys from the pit would come and have all these guys in their maybe late 20s to early 30s tell me, completely out of shape, drinking every night, tell me what a great athlete they were at 19 or something. And I always used to think back then, I was like, man, that's got to be so sad to be like, talking about something when you were basically still a teenager, still a kid. That was the thing that you were bragging about when you're in your early 30s. And so I just love that mindset of, like you said, you give it everything, you tick the box, but then you don't rest on your laurels. And you have that mindset where, and looking back at everything that I'm proud of, that 6 or 7 years to achieve mastery, that seems about right. It probably took me 6 or 7 years to be a really good trader. It took me six years to be a really good boxer. All these things in real estate took me years to get really competent. Whereas so many people want to rush the process. And what you said about when you were in the military, you were trying to learn everything. That's the best advice. I give that to people when I'm mentoring people in real estate. They always want to focus on how am I going to make money next week or next month. And I say the money will come if you focus on skill development. And I think if I was giving my son hypothetical advice when he was 20 years old and he couldn't decide what to do for a career, I would say just work for different companies and don't worry about the money. Try and get as much experience and invest in yourself. And then eventually you'll figure it out that that's priceless. The experience you invest in yourself, and I think you're a great example of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got 5 kids. They're all grown, and when they were getting out of college and they were starting to start their professional lives, when they ran into a situation they weren't happy at work, whatever, I'd say, you know what? They're paying you to do a job, and all the rest of that experience you're getting for free. So treat it like it's a college course on really crappy leadership, or a college course on how not to do sales, or a college course on how to let your social media platforms just fall apart. You can learn as much or more from watching the failures and absorbing the lessons of failures than you can from watching people that are successful. And ask questions. And if they finally tell you to shut up, okay, then be polite. But if you do that, then every single job, you basically suck the wisdom and the information out of that particular environment, that the context of that area, that industry, whatever it is. And when you move to the next one, you're 5 times, 10 times stronger than somebody who doesn't do it that way. And I said, the other funny thing is, one of my Louis Pasteur, chance favors the prepared mind, was, quote, you don't realize it, but you're preparing yourself for a moment that's coming maybe in 2 years, maybe in 4 years, where somebody turns to you and says, what do you know about, setting up a social media platform? What do you know about sales funnels and things? And you've actually absorbed stuff that wasn't your job, but you say, well, I know enough to help. Suddenly you're doing something related to some offline thing you picked up 2 jobs ago because you paid attention and asked questions. So you don't get to pick the way the universe kind of places you as you go through life. But a lot of times I've made decisions that were based on me reading a bunch of books I was interested in a particular subject, and then all of a sudden a door opened up 2 years later, and I happened to be the person that knew everything about that subject. I was actually in a boardroom one time, and somebody asked a question, and I just started spitting out all this information. Well, how the hell do you know that? Well, I studied it once, just kind of for fun and everything. And I ended up being put in charge of the problem that they were trying to solve. So, you never know how you're going to apply it, but you will apply everything you absorb and learn. So be a learning machine. Don't just stick to your job. I mean, I don't think millennials are all, the stereotype is great for things like Saturday Night Live, whatever, but if you come into a business and say, I want to know what my job is, where my cubicle is, and I'm going to take all this time off and I don't want to have to bother with anything else, you're not affecting anybody negatively, really, except for yourself, because that monolithic approach to life is going to leave you, short of all those experiences you could have had and all that information you could have absorbed.
That's so true. Life really isn't linear, and it's so true. You by being your best self and really investing in as much as you can and learn as much as you can, you never know when it might pay off. And that's such a great lesson. With you said when you went into the military, you kind of had that with your tough upbringing. You kind of had the resilience already to succeed. And it just in general, I know a lot of people that go in the military, it gives them this rite of passage to adulthood. I know I've got a friend in Germany and I've got a friend in Israel, and they both do the compulsory military service. And he was telling me, my German buddy, he was saying about how good it was. He was such a kind of a lost punk kid, and his couple of years in the military service really molded him. And so when I met him at college, he was a few years older than me, even though we just both started college together. And he was just so much more mature, and he'd grown up so much in those few years. And I think that's something that seems to be missing for a lot of young people, is that rite of passage. Did any of your 5 kids go in the military, or did you help them to try and get that transition from, kind of boy to man or girl to woman, that evolution?
2 sons, 3 daughters. And the only one that wanted to go in the military, he didn't really come up with this thought until he was a senior in high school, was my oldest son. So he joined the Air Force, did a combat tour in Iraq. Communications expert. He wasn't there to wield a bayonet or anything at the end of a rifle. He was very patriotic, and he wanted to do his part. So he joined after 9/11 and went off and did that. The others had never really expressed any interest in it. And I didn't wear that on my sleeve as a parent. They all got to see me come in under a square parachute and land right in front of them after jumping out of an airplane at 10,000 feet, that kind of stuff. That's cool to see Dad floating out of the sky and driving a steerable parachute. It's like a a family parachute exhibition of one. They got to see kind of cool things like that, but it was just kind of it was like going to the circus. I mean, I never tried to instill in them a desire to go in the military. My dad was a Korean War veteran, did 4 years. He really liked his military experience, referred to it once in a while. It wasn't until I was a senior in high school when he said, I don't have enough money for college for you, so you better join the military like I did, and maybe you can get the GI Bill. So I joined the military. So it wasn't like he was bombarding me with, conditioning me to go into the military. So I think, for the thing about just general military service, forget special ops and all that. If you've lived a life that's fairly relaxed and loose, and maybe your parents have, thrown a pillow in front of you every time you started to stumble and fall so that you wouldn't get hurt. If you go into the military, it's very hard. You can quit. It's hard to quit in boot camp and things like that. But what happens is, remember I said, everybody has the ability to change and adapt to become this way. And that's what boot camps are really hoping is true, right? They bring you in and they yell at you, and you're jostled around and run around with all these strangers, and you're away from home and all the comforts and the comfort handling of your parents, that you've got you in a bubble. There's no bubble. You get the perception that everything's out of control and you have no rights or power or anything. It starts to work on your psychology. But if you get through 9, 10, 11 weeks, depending on the service, you get through that boot camp process, at the other end, you're a different person, because you actually had to go through 9 or 11 weeks and experience this. You didn't get to experience it for 2 hours and then go home.
Yeah.
And for most people, it changes them in a significant way. And family members or other people can perceive a change in them even after that short of a period of time, that they seem older and more mature. It's just that now they're grounded in their own philosophy. They're not just a reflection of their parents or reflection of the way they were raised. And it could be the same thing if you're a renegade, kind of a lone wolf, and you never trusted anybody. You would never team up with anybody, whatever. You get that pounded out of you, and you start to see the value of people combining, because there's exercises in all these boot camps. It's a 5-person job. You can't do it with anything less than 5 people, and all 5 people have to figure out how to solve it. And all 5 people have to put 1/5 of the effort into it, or it doesn't get done. And so that's a lesson that's metaphorically hammered in there through different exercises and tasks. And so the lone wolf personality comes out the other end. They may be an individualist, but they also feel that there's strength in numbers. And so they've matured. And then the next series of training is your professional training, a little less intense, but still controlled and still organized and structured. And so if you only do 4 years in the military, you're going to be different for it. There's nothing really like that comparably in regular civilian society. School is not like that. I mean, maybe a long time ago we had to go into school and you put in, 14 hours of study every single solitary day. But those schools don't exist really anywhere anymore, like a Jesuit education or something. Yeah. So it's very difficult for a regular person, unless they make a decision like a workout program. They just wake up one morning and say, I'm going to change the way I live, and I'm going to change all these aspects, and I'm going to hold to it until they completely change in their behaviors.
Yeah, in terms of just that, so looking at your 3 boys, do you think the one that went into the military, he grew up a lot quicker than the other 2? It took the other 2 longer to kind of have that transition to adulthood because they didn't have the pressure of the military training?
My oldest was probably the most immature. He was a really happy-go-lucky, give his shirt off his back to anybody. I mean, really naive and nice. And I think he probably through the process got up on par with my other kids.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, the other kids seemed to be, they were more sober and mature and serious and all that, at the same age when they hit 18 than he was. So in his case, he ended up kind of coming back to the center line where they were kind of really close there already.
Right. That makes sense. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you hadn't made that decision to go in the military when you were so young?
Nobody's ever asked me that before. That's a great question. I have never. That's one what if storyline I've never really tried to chase down. I don't know why. Pretty much everything else I did, I got the SEAL training by a mistake in my orders. I was supposed to go to be a radar operator, air traffic control guy on a ship in the Mediterranean, and they screwed up my orders, and I ended up at SEAL training. And then they talked me into volunteering. So I think about that. What would have happened if those orders didn't get mixed up? I would have been out on a ship someplace, and what would my life have been after that? I am a novelist, so I can play with those storylines and wonder, what would I do? But at the same time, other than gleaning some lesson, some valuable lesson from that, I don't really spend a whole lot of time thinking about the what ifs. I kind of roll with it. Like, I don't hold grudges. It's wasted energy, and it's negative energy. So I'm kind of like my oldest son. I'm not naive, but I'm charitable. I think everybody's a clean slate, and then they basically have to show themselves to be something less than that. And I've been burned once or twice in business. And but what's the alternative? Everybody's an enemy, and they're all out to get you. I mean, that's a hell of a way to live.
Marty, I'm so glad you said that, because I'm still going through some lawsuits with getting burned with a developer that screwed me over. And it's the second time I've been burned. I was burned by an old trading partner. And one of my oldest and best friends said to me, Lawrence, you should be really thankful, because you haven't let those experiences change you too much. You still have that same, almost a little bit naive, seeing the best in everybody. And I thought about it, and I said that, what, even if it might have cost me some monetary amount, I'd much rather go through my life like that than what you just said about how, the alternative is where you're, skeptical and worried, and you see the worst in people. I don't want to live like that. So I think there's so much that the older I get, the more I realize that it's really not your life circumstances that matters. It's how you perceive them. And I think that goes a long way. Just seeing the best in people goes a long way to just being a happier, nicer person.
Kind of like your phase 2 values, personal values and philosophy, right? Phase 1, your parents tell you, don't lie, cheat, or steal. You borrow something, return it in equal or better shape. Your word is your bond, all that kind of stuff. But then things like this, deciding, are you a pessimist or an optimist for the rest of your life? Are you somebody who holds a grudge, or are you somebody that forgives and moves forward? Are you somebody that treats everybody like an enemy and you interact with them that way and prepare for the worst? Or are you somebody that's the opposite of that? Those are things your parents don't really get a chance to talk to you about. And so at some point in your life, you have to decide that. And I just decided as a life philosophy, it was better to be optimistic and to be charitable and forgiving. And if I get hit once in a while, okay, that's the consequence of me choosing that approach to life.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Marty, I'd love to talk a little bit about just the three main ideas in your 3 business books. So the idea of being, if we can start with being nimble. I know you talked a bit about your background in that book, but the idea of being nimble, I think, is more important today than it was for maybe a generation ago. I look at my father; he had the same career his whole life. So whereas now, if you look at most people, professionally at least, they're switching every few years. They're switching jobs, switching companies, sometimes switching careers. It's a much more, with technology, society, and opportunities in business and opportunities to pay the bills, they seem to be changing very quickly. So I think the idea of being nimble is just such an important one today.
So the first book is about crisis leadership. It's about scaling companies, both scaling them in a positive way by growing them, and in some cases, scaling them down, because that's what you have to do to survive. And in scaling scenarios in business, the challenges are creating dollars or saving dollars. Dollars usually equate to processes, systems, or people, and that means you have to make a decision. So it's about judgment. It's about how you gain wisdom through the sum total of your failures and your successes, and then how do you apply that judgment? And the psychological aspects of being a leader in those kind of dynamic circumstances, which part of that is all that and much more is wrapped up in that being agile or nimble intellectually prepares you and allows you to succeed in dynamic environments that have been either impacted internally and caused everything to be kind of upside down or been impacted externally, like a 9/11 or a COVID virus or something. Your entire business could be screwed up because of a supply chain thing that happened because of a war or something like a pandemic. Now you got to try to solve it. And you can't solve it with what you were using before, because what you're using before is now done. Not going to do that. So it's all those things in leadership. And be visionary is more about how do you prepare in advance for these things? How do you create a vision of where you should be going? How do you evaluate the competition, the competitive landscape 360 degrees around you? Are there other industries that have faced some of the challenges you think you're going to be facing? And how do they deal with them? Are they applicable and transferable to your industry? Anything like, say, supply chain management. If the oil industry ran into a problem with supply chain management a decade ago and then figured out a workaround, and now you're running into it trying to deliver cars or shoes from a point of origin to a distribution point, maybe by looking at how they solved it in the oil industry, it's still moving a product from point A to point B. There's something that you may be able to apply. And that means you have to be intellectually curious. You have to be willing to look at everything anew, everything fresh, look at lots of different sources of information, look way outside of your normal group of people or whatever, definitely outside of your own knowledge and experience, so that you can truly create a creative, visionary plan for either chasing an opportunity or avoiding a threat that's out on the horizon.
Marty, that idea of preparing in advance, I just think that's so applicable to right now. I look at the last few years between just the general trend of technology changing so many industries, and then you have this crazy inflation that a lot of people weren't prepared for the last year, and interest rates going up, 2.5 times or something in a short period. And then what I think is almost an existential threat in artificial intelligence that's going to make a lot of jobs obsolete. It's more important than ever to try and be thinking ahead. And it's almost impossible to predict the future, but just seeing some of the problems, we can just never rest on our laurels. No matter how good things are today, it's most likely not going to be good in, 12 months or 18 months. Things are changing so quickly.
Yeah. I mean, Be Visionary focuses on the universe. And I start Be Different the same way. The universe is in motion, constant motion, and change is inevitable. So trying to make things stable and or hoping that things will stay the same is kind of definition of insanity, because that's not the way the universe works. So, I've worked with some people, say financial services, and I've said, so when I was managing money for UBS, the threat when I first entered the industry was Scottrade and Schwab and, discount brokers. And it wasn't easy to do it online yet. Not really, but yeah, that was coming. And so UBS, Merrill Lynch, other big, what they called wirehouses, made strategic decisions to not be a retail oriented point of purchase type organization anymore, but to shift to enterprise and holistic high net worth individual trusts and foundations and wealth management. And so they got out of the transitional and they went towards the fee-based, where you paid somebody for your information and your wisdom on how to orchestrate their world, their life, or whatever, which they could have split the baby. They could have said, we're going to beat Scottrade and Schwab at their own game and try to do some of this and have two different. The ones that really survived and did well completely got out of that game. Another guy that I was working with recently, helping me in the cyber division on one of the companies. And I said, so what would you do right now if you're starting from scratch? You've been in this for 18 years. You built something from 60 million to 250 million. And he said, well, I get completely out of the Geek Squad business, getting a call 24/7 on call to come and fix a wire, plug something in, hit the on button. He said, you can't pay the people enough, can't pay competent people enough. They don't stick around. So you can't do it. So he said, we transitioned to infrastructure design and development and installation. Okay. He goes, but then everything starts moving to the cloud. So as everything starts moving to the cloud, you realize there's a lot less installation. There's a lot less, brick and mortar type activity. So then they shifted to cybersecurity. So they've actually gone through 3 iterations over 18 years but they got ahead of it, and they transitioned into, and then eventually transitioned completely out of the old thing as a business decision. Real estate, I've got a real estate attorney who's a good friend of mine, and before the interest rates went the way they did, he was talking to me. He was kicking butt like anybody in real estate when interest rates were really low, and he said, "What do you think I should do?" And I said, "I think you should look at, cutting your revenue in half and doing a hypothetical. You have too much infrastructure for half that revenue." He goes, "Why?" I said, "Because at some point here, the interest rates will start coming up. They may come up fast, may come up slow, and you're going to have to reinvent the way your business is set up. Or you may have to cut the infrastructure related to the kind of business you're doing now and come up with one or two other legal type businesses or lines that are somewhat interest rate proof. In other words, they won't be affected the same way." And so he did a lot of it, but it happened so fast. It happened about 3 months after we had the talk. But he remembered the talk, and then he called me up and he said, "Yeah, I'm going to do this and this. What do you think?" and all that. So I prefer to try to think of the hypothetical way in advance, storyboard out different possibilities, load it with time, people, costs, whatever, and sit back and look at it. And then you can say, "I don't think the first one's going to ever happen," but at least you got it all kind of worked out, right? And you can just put it on the shelf if you don't want to. That's kind of the military way. You create a contingency plan for a particular target that's critical. And if we ever go to war with that particular place, it's still going to be a critical target. You get a bunch of planners in there, you figure it out down to the last bullet, put it on the shelf. And then if you go to war with those people, somebody else pulls that thing off the shelf and they dust it off and they tweak it a little bit. Yeah, I think that would be beneficial. And that's what the second book's about. The third book's about how to be creative, how to be innovative, and how to implement creative and innovative impulses so that you actually make it an effect. You positively change things. You positively move the needle. A lot of people don't know. They think being creative is something that's like a DNA thing. There are creative people and then there's everybody else. And there are innovative people and then there's everybody else. And it's not really true. And it's not true by biology. Brain science has shown that there was a research result that came out about now a month ago. 1,000 6-year-olds, 1,000 14-year-olds, 1,000 24-year-olds, and 1,000 40-year-olds, and they were all given the same creativity assessment test. The 6-year-olds scored in the high 90 percentile. So 95%, let's say, of the 6-year-olds scored high in creativity. 75% for the 14-year-olds, 25% for the 24-year-olds, 2 to 3% for the 40-year-olds.
Wow.
Then they made a point that they had all had their health looked at and everything. There was nothing wrong with any of them biologically. So if the brain can be creative, their thesis was, what happens from 6 years old to 40 years old? Why don't they test well at the end if it's the same exact organ between their ears? Same capabilities.
That's fascinating. So
and
it's the mindset.
So came to the conclusion, it's the mindset that's created, it's the condition it's created. And I talked to it in the first 3 chapters of my book, which was great because I already sent it to the publisher. When I saw that report, I sent it out to a bunch of people and said, because I've spent the first 3 chapters to be different, explaining how we're conditioned to believe we can't be. We can't be creative at any level. We can't be innovative at any level. And the conditioning, which this research verified, was the school system. And it's worse in other countries. I've got a good friend in India. They have kind of an old style British system. So there's very little fluff in their program. It's in reading, writing, arithmetic, whatever. Nobody's going to suffer anybody raising a hand with a question about, anything outside the box, so to speak. There's no wonder. There's no awe. There's no speculation. There's no, contemplation. It's memorize what we're telling you. This is the history of engineering, the history of chemistry, the history of English, the history, whatever. Take the test, pass the test, move on to university. Now we're going to teach you the history at a lot higher level. It's still history. You get graded on how much of the history you can regurgitate back. So unless you're in a PhD program where you actually have to create something from scratch, leveraging history, the vast majority of us get this pounded out of us. There's no value. There's no reward for thinking creatively. That's why 6-year-olds who don't have any of those pressures are creative. And 40-year-olds are worried that if they do that in a boardroom environment, they're going to lose their job, lose the next pay raise, or will be looked at like they're idiots because they just said something that's not their job to say. because there's a certain amount of stuff you can say and everything else is somebody else's job. Yeah. So it's all about the restrictive nature of the obedience culture. But I'm talking most all about the use of the mind, the intellect. So because beyond mindset, it's more like how do you reinvigorate a 40-year-old if the mechanical capabilities are there? How do you get them to start? They have to kind of shed and shred all this baggage that they picked up, which is real psychological baggage. There's a real fear factor. They remember every time they were told, stupid idea, shut up, sit down, So that it addresses all that, because being creative and being innovative and applying those things is kind of like the next level beyond just basic leadership and planning.
Oh, that's so interesting, because my wife's a therapist, and she said so much of the stuff she's doing with her clients is changing these negative mindsets that are negative in the sense that they're negatively affecting their relationships. And it's so much of it stems back from people's youth. And that's exactly the same with the creativity too. And I saw my son yesterday, he was playing in the bath. So he's turning 3 in a couple of weeks. And he's got these little magnets he puts on the wall of the bath with a road. And then he's got these little magnets for cars. And you and I, if we were doing it, we'd put the road like a regular road. But his road is going basically up in the sky, zigzagging, all crazy. And I remember thinking, I had that exact thought where I started to kind of show him how the road goes. And then I was like, you know what? Like, just let him be a kid, let him be creative, build his roads however he wants. And but it's so true. It's that natural instinct as an adult to stifle his wild creativity because it's unrealistic, as we say. But like you said, with those studies, I mean, it's not good. Society's going to do it enough. My job as a parent is to try and nurture that creativity. So I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, definitely. If you can do it in parallel with this, you can't change the school system probably, but if a 14-year-old says they want to be a lead singer in a rock and roll band, at least the parent should say, well, what does that look like? How long would that take? What would the lessons look like? And not you don't have to encourage, you just entertain the idea and not crush it immediately. Because everybody else is going to. Their friends are going to go, you're never going to be able to do that. Everybody's going to tell them no. Just be the voice that says, yeah, that could possibly happen.
Yeah, because there's a wonderful quote, and I'm forgetting who said it, but he said something like, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And I think that there's so much truth to that. Right now, depression and suicide and addiction and all these negative things are, real highs right now. They've got a lot higher the last, decade, and especially the last few years. So if you're trying to do everything to fit in with society, that's not necessarily the best choice. And if all the people that I admire are people like Elon Musk, that when he was saying he's going to set up a rocket company, his friends did an intervention. They were like, you're going to lose everything. You're crazy. And they were so forcefully trying to stop him. And then he just had the incredible news, I think a couple of days ago, with one of his rockets landing. And it was like a big milestone he passed. So like people like that, I just admire them so much because they're doing great things in spite of even not just random people online, people that don't know them, but even their closest friends and family are saying, don't do this, you're crazy. And they're still doing it and succeeding in spite of that.
Yeah, there's been an absolute acceleration in rulemaking for the last 20 years that just is so incredibly onerous, because if the system wants you to be normal, and normal is defined by the rules, and they're making new rules every 50 seconds, that's why you get people that are matching themselves against a matrix of rules where there's very little room now to be yourself, to be human, to have any other options without declaring war on normal. And so they, and you see this with actors, and you see this with artists all the time. The ones that break out, they usually ignore the rules. That's the subheading of the third book is how Navy SEALs and entrepreneurs bend to break or ignore the rules to get results. So, you have to know when to bend them, you have to know when to break them, and you have to know when to just completely ignore them. And the ones that ignore them, like an Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or Tesla or Einstein, who I'm finishing my third book on him. Einstein couldn't even get a job because he wasn't following the rules. Everything he wrote was in the face of standard logic, standard physics, and all the powers in Europe that were in charge of all these universities wouldn't give him a job. They wouldn't bring him on as an assistant professor, nothing, because he was a radical, defined by not agreeing with me.
But that's such a good reminder, Marty. It's so many great people that changed history were laughed at and ridiculed at the time, and it was only eventually the ideas became accepted, and then eventually it becomes normal. But we forget. I didn't know that. I've read about Einstein, but I didn't know the extent to which he was. Which he was demonized. That's wild.
The other thing is all these people I mentioned, almost all of them are younger than 32 years old. Alexander the Great was younger than 32. Napoleon was younger than 32. If you start digging at people that really shook the world up in any category that they shook it up, they tend to be young. It's not 60 and 70-year-olds. It's not 50-year-olds. It's people that either weren't told the rules, didn't know the rules, and so just went their own way. And because everybody else was following the rules, they became the rule changers. They became the new way of life. Or they saw the rules, didn't think they made any sense, and ignored them or broke them and moved forward anyway. But that's an attribute of youth. But it's not it's not a biological attribute. And you can have that same mindset as long as you don't have dementia or Alzheimer's. You can have that same mindset up until the day you die. The brain is wired the same way at 6 years old and 14 and 25 or 24 and 40 and 60. You just have been told, don't do it.
Marty, that's so fascinating. So there's one thing that jiu-jitsu is really exploding in popularity, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I've been training now over 20 years. And I just read something the other day and it said, if you're an instructor and you see two beginners who are grappling each other on the mats, don't be so quick to correct them and show them the right way to do things. Let them just enjoy the flowingness, the play, because at its essence, unless you're really having one of those matches where you're really trying to kill the guy, a lot of jiu-jitsu is just adult play. And I think that's why it appeals to so many people. And that really changed my mindset, because for me, I started learning jiu-jitsu. I used to hate jiu-jitsu. And I was learning it because I was a boxer and I wanted to one day compete in MMA. And I thought, well, I better learn what to do if I go on the ground, I don't want to get strangled. So I was always learning it as a backup system. And over time, as I got older, and you talked about in giving some money to that foundation with the TBI injuries, one of my really good teammates is suffering from some TBI issues. And I became more and more worried about head trauma. And now I'm in my 40s. I haven't boxed in years, but I do jiu-jitsu, 3-4 times a week because it has the longevity. But I just love that idea of adult play. And I never really made that connection with jiu-jitsu, but it's so true. It really is a form of adult play.
And you really mess them up in the very beginning if you turn it into choreography. Because choreography is just another set of rules. You have to do this before that before this. It doesn't matter if it's stand-up fighting either. I mean, if somebody teaches you, you always have to do that. I mean, they teach in combos, right? So that when you're stressed and you're tired, you throw combos. But the master level fighter isn't throwing in combos. They're in the moment. Yeah. And they've got enough tools and tricks and things. And they may have prepared for it, but they spend a round trying to understand what the other person's all about. And then they come up with a game plan that maybe be close to what they planned for, or might be completely different because they're a master level fighter. And so then they adopt in football, American football, the first quarter, everybody's watching, all the coordinators, and they start changing the game plan. They start moving people around. They know how to exploit what they're seeing in the moment, and they're adaptable in the moment. And jiu-jitsu, what you're basically doing is you're inhibiting, I'll call it physical instinctiveness. When you're rolling and you feel a twitch or a slight move or a slight change in the posture, I mean, it's real subtle. If you've developed more free and natural, you can think a couple of plays ahead of time, because if he keeps doing this, I'm going to exploit this by doing this. I'm going to counter. He's going to think I'm doing this, but I'm not. I'm going to do this. But if you disconnect somebody from that instinctive feel of what's going on, they're going to be thinking like, I've got to do this, and this, like a set of rules, like a 1, 2, 3, and it's just going to retard their growth, their development. They're going to be 5 steps behind somebody who's been taught the other way.
Exactly. And also, if you have that mindset where you have 5 steps to complete a move, and you're at step 3, and then your opponent moves the wrong way, you're completely lost because you can't do step 4 because so you're just lost with that way of thinking. So that works against people that are very unskilled. But you're right. As soon as it becomes, skilled people, you have to be way more flexible. Like Bruce Lee said, be like water, kind of go
Be like
with
water,
the flow. Yeah.
Flow
Actually,
and crash. And it works in business too. I mean, I've got business development people, and I've explained to them that you have to get to the master level, which is go with the flow of the engagement, and don't jam your presentation down somebody's throat, whether they want it or not. Listen to what's going on, watch body language. It's the same kind of instinctive thing. And, people are taught features and benefits, and are taught how to, kind of some intro, body, summary, ask for the order, or whatever. And there was an example where I met somebody with another guy at the elevator, and he was taking us out to a big Fortune 500 defense company. The guy that was with me was actually the main sales guy, was a VP of sales. And so he put together a beautiful PowerPoint. He had all of them copied and nice covers and everything, and in his little briefcase. We get in there, and it turns out the guy that we were talking to was a special operations pilot, and that we'd both been in Panama in the same airspace during the invasion of Panama. So we start talking, and we're still talking when we get out of the elevator. And we walk into the boardroom and we sit down. And I had just joined this company about a month and a half later. I was supposed to be watching, supposedly. Even though I came from a really big billion-dollar company down to a small company, the guy in charge of sales, my partner for that day, wanted me to just watch. We had a breakfast rehearsal where he went through his whole presentation. Got it. So we sit down, and the whole point of what we're there to do is we want to become a subcontractor on their major contract. And so the guy says, while my partner's handing out the PowerPoints, he says, so you guys want to come on our platform, right? Be a sub? And I said, absolutely. He goes, okay, we can do that. Now, at that point, it might have been a 5-step plan, but we were like at 1.2 on the first, between step 1 and step 2. And we got what we came for.
Yeah.
My partner started forcing the guy to listen to his PowerPoint presentation. And I could see the guy was getting irritated. And so basically we showed up. He had all the intention in the world to make us. And I'm thinking, now is he going to not use us? So I said,
yeah.
I just said, hey, I'll tell you what, save a lot of time on your end. We can leave this here, right? And I'm looking at the other guy, and he's looking at me like, you're messing up my system. I said, we can leave this here with you and everything, but how do we go forward? You guys send us a teaming agreement or a sub-K contract or whatever. He goes, yeah, I'll do that. And said point of contact, and gave point of contact. And we walked out of there, and the guy looked at me, he goes, that didn't go well. And I said, what are you talking about? The objective was not to give a PowerPoint presentation. The objective was to close the deal and get what we came here to get.
Exactly.
You weren't paying attention to anything he said. And he goes, well, and I said, I'll tell you how I learned it. One of the very first mega millionaire type guys that I did a presentation for, I was in his living room. He's 79 years old and self-made guy, World War II vet. And I got to the early start stage, and I said, do you have a will? No. Do you have an estate plan? No. Okay. And then I said, do you realize that you could lose as much as 58% of your estate, taxes and everything, unless you have some of these protective measures in? And he looked at me and goes, you're a damn liar. And his blue-haired wife was sitting there, and she's like looking nervous. And I'm in their living room, and I've got this flip chart of paper. And I went, well, I reached my briefcase, and I pulled out the tax tables and grabbed a highlighter, and I highlighted, there's your bracket. If you don't have anything in place to protect your wealth, the wealth that you've created, 58% or 55%, whatever it was, of your wealth, bye-bye. Not going to your wife, not going to your kids, And he looked at it, and then I went. And so then I flipped the piece of paper and continued on with my well-rehearsed presentation, because I was only a year out of the military at this point. I knew how to give a presentation. And I start going, and he goes, hey, let me tell you what I used to tell my sales guys. When you've made the sale, shut the hell up. And I'm not staring at him going, I don't know what the hell that means. So I didn't, that first story wasn't because I was a super genius, just because I had that same moment. And this guy was willing to tell me I was screwing it up.
Because once you showed him the number, he's like, I'm in, basically.
Right. But I was gonna make him watch all the rest of the show. So, and that was my first really high net worth client, and I learned a huge lesson. I don't have to study features and benefits. I don't have to do the dog and pony. I can do that. But if at any moment I see an opening, I can change direction and go with the flow, right? Instinctive. I can, because I understand what the objective is in the end of this. So yeah, you can apply jujitsu, you can apply it to life, you can apply it to business.
Marty, I absolutely love that. I don't want to take all your afternoon, but I got a couple more things I wanted to talk to you about. Firstly, I wanted to thank you because last time we spoke, I was really dragging my feet on me and a friend were writing a book on real estate investing. And we kind of agreed, he was going to do some of the more kind of analytical, mathematic area part, and I was going to write more of the philosophical, more of my backstory about how I got into real estate investing. And I was really dragging my feet. I was in the middle of moving to a different house, doing a rehab, all this different stuff. And you told me, just make it a daily routine. And so I finally got it done. So I was thinking, I can't talk to you until I've at least, it's not published yet, but it's just been edited and it's back with the editor right now. I'm hoping to release it, I think, early January. But so I want to thank you. But I also want to ask you, Marty, because, Be Different is going to be your 12th book. And I'm sure you've learned and grown so much. Is there any just to kind of nuggets of wisdom for either for me or for anyone listening who wants to, write one book or a couple of books on some of the things you've learned? Because I'm sure you've learned so much throughout the process.
I've helped two people from a point of, I think I'd like to write about my idea, my experience, my knowledge, whatever, to the point of producing and publishing the book. So one was published in January this year. The second guy published his in June. And then I sat down with that same real estate guy I mentioned earlier, the real estate attorney. And I said, so what's inhibiting you? Why don't you want to write? What's stopping you? And he said, because I don't believe anybody's going to really care about what I have to say. And those are the exact same words that came out of those other two guys' mouths when I asked the same question. So the greatest form of writer's block is never starting. And it really comes down to that question for a lot of people. And I'm talking more about nonfiction right now. And then I said to one of the guys, I said, so do you want to make $1 million? Is that the point of writing this? Well, not really. Are you trying to influence people? Well, sure. Are you trying to help people? And I go, yeah, I think it would really help people. And I said, all right, how many people do you have to help to make this worth your while in writing? Does it have to be 100,000 people have to be helped? 10,000? He goes, no, not at all. I said, what if you wrote this book and only one person changed their life or changed the way they did things and benefited from it? And he said, well, then it would be worth it. And I said, then write the damn book. Because there's going to be somebody who's going to benefit from it. And so that's my way of kind of getting past that first hurdle, which is nobody's going to want to hear anything I have to say. And I had that same hurdle when I started to write Be Nimble. I sat there and went, first off, what do I write about? And then who's going to care? So the second thing is, the what. And most people try to write about everything, like it's a catalog of all their experiences, whatever. But if you wrote down, an outline in one page of what you want the book to be about, and then you say, okay, if I was going to break this into 5 books, how would I organize it? Right. And usually it's by a lifespan. That's an easy way to do it. The chronology of your professional and personal experience. And if you chunk it that way, it might be, there may not be enough material that would do more than one book and those become the chapters, but it may be that it's clear you have so much to talk to that this is really probably 2 books. Mm-hmm. So then what you do is you shrink it down to, rather than making it a general covering 20 years, make it about the first 10 years, your beginnings, your early struggles and everything, and save the second one for the second book. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing is what you referenced. You have to come up with a discipline system and give yourself a break. You only have to write, one page on a Word 8 by 10 is 300-ish words. So just write one page or write one paragraph and then The next day, show up and write the second paragraph. Some days you'll write more, some days you'll write less, but just do something every day and try not to stop and analyze what you wrote. Have a basic set of milestones. Like I want to talk about my upbringing. Then I want to talk about my early days in, say, college. Then I want to talk about my early days in business. Then I want to talk about when I stopped working for the man, I decided to start my own company. And then maybe you have 3 companies worth of experience. So then the next chapter is about the first company and it went under or whatever happened. Try to take your life in chunks, put that in an order, and then it's easier to write to the shorter parameters. And then you just kind of put those little mini stories together and you get to the end of it. Wait till you're done at the end of it before you go back and start reading any of it. And even better, like I use, have a couple of people that you think would be interested in that topic or subject matter and ask if they would be willing to read it. Easier to have them do it chapter at a time. Because if you give anybody a 300-page book and say, hey, tell me what you think. But on a chapter by chapter basis, and I don't put time parameters on them. They read them and they get them back. And actually they like it because if they like what I'm writing about, they're getting a free book, basically. They're getting the free insights and all that. So that's kind of how I would go about it. You have to get past the why me, who gives a shit, kind of thing. The second thing is, what do I want to write about, and how much material do I have, and how do I kind of pare that back to something that is digestible? Then take that piece and chop it up into milestones. So that gives you kind of your chapter breakdown, and then create the discipline and start writing.
I absolutely love that. And I mean, talking about what you were talking about, as we get older, we tend to be less creative. I think just writing in general is just a great avenue to do something creative. Just like this podcast has been one of the reasons that I started it was because a really good friend of mine said, you're always looking to read and learn and do things passively, but you're kind of neglecting the creative aspect. And he was my original mentor. He had a podcast back in the day that was very successful, which he's actually taken a break from. But he was the one who said to do it. And I had that exact same thing. Who's going to listen? Why me? And very early on, I had a couple of the most random people reach out to me, and I hadn't spoken to them in many years. And they were like, I was going through something, and I listened to this recent podcast you did, and it really helped me. And just that little bit of positive feedback, that was enough to kind of keep going. But so I absolutely love that. It's such a natural roadblock in anything creative is why me? And especially today, there's so much content out there. Why me? But then why not me? So I really love that, Marty.
Yeah, you can do that with painting. You can do that with starting a business. That's the same kind of. It's the reverse of the question. Can I be successful? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you want to do it and you've decided to try it. And so go ahead and try it.
Last thing I want to ask you, Marty, you have 5 adult kids, and I'm just starting my family. I would love if you could share a couple of nuggets of wisdom, maybe in parenting, or something maybe you wished you knew when you were a young father that you now know today.
Although it's kind of cliche, they're all going to turn out completely different than you think. They're all going to have different pursuits. They're going to have different politics. They're going to have different choices in their life partners. You can't control it. You can't orchestrate it. You can't plan it. You just have to kind of go with that natural flow. You'll be amazed. I mean, even when they're 14 or 15 and somebody wants them to do something that they know is not right, they'll know it's not right because that was instilled in them in that early age. It's too late when they're 14 to try to tell them what's right and wrong. They've already decided that that's a flexible standard because that's right. What they've been conditioned to believe is okay. Expect that your kids are going to be your best friend until they're 12 years old and might be your enemy until they're 24.
But that's a hard one.
It is a hard one because, I remember the moment the youngest didn't want to go on a ride when I was running an errand. The last one. Because when they're young and everything, it's like, hey, I'm going to go. They didn't care where you were going. You're just going to go put gas in the car. But they wanted to go with you, right? And then there's a day where it's more important to be with the friends. It's more important to be doing something else. And I actually had a Ford Expedition, and after that happened and nobody ever wanted to go on a trip with me, I pulled up at a light one day and I had the seats down. So I looked back and I felt like I was driving a school bus. And I go, okay, what am I driving this thing for? Nobody's ever going to get in this vehicle with me again. The oldest one's got his own car. It's like, so, there's at that moment. And that's one thing. The second thing about that is when they start to become their own people and the hormones kick in and the social pressures to conform and be a part of the group run against what you want them to do, there's conflict, there's natural conflict. And a guy told me when I was running into it, my oldest, he had 5 kids too, all real big boys who they play football, college and stuff. He said, just do this. Never say or do anything you can't take back when you get into the heat of the moment. Obviously never hit them, never belittle them in front of other friends. Don't do something that can never be taken back, because they'll remember that and that'll change the dynamic and make it much, much harder when they eventually mature in their mid-20s and realize they have great parents that really cared about them and did everything right. Because they'll come back to you around 23, 24, and suddenly they want to have a beer and just shoot the breeze about life, or they call you up, they want to know about how to get a mortgage, and it's just like they're 12 years old again. It's that middle section that if I knew that, I would have been more relaxed. It took me 2 kids to figure it out. And then I went, okay. So after the first 2, I'm like, got it. And I told my wife that all the time. I said, our oldest daughter is going to be your best friend by the time she's 25. I guarantee it. Because you two love each other so much, but you're also bashing heads about stuff. And it happened. I mean, they're best friends. So yeah, if you can do that as a parent, that'd be really, really sound advice.
Marty, that was great. And man, I've until they're 8 years old, so I've only got 5 years. I gotta really appreciate
8 years old for values, 12 years
values,
old. 12 years old, 12 and a half. 12 and a half is when you are not cool to be with. Just do the mall test. You just keep taking them to the mall and stuff. And the day they don't want to be seen with you in the mall, that's probably at about 12 and a half. It's over.
I love that. Marty, I love that. It's always such a pleasure. And you're such an inspiration for me, because I always have my deepest admiration for people that succeed in multiple different things. And you epitomize that. And also, I'm getting ready to write my first book. I can't wait to read your 12th, Be Different. It sounds incredible. And you're always so positive. And I love your wisdom, your character, your, personality, your disposition. You're really, I'm so glad we met. You're just a really great inspiration for me. So thank you, Marty. I always appreciate your time.
Well, and thank you, Lawrence.